Dobrze, jest już 5 po, tak jak ja wspomniałem na samym początku. Jerzy, możesz spokojnie zacząć. Ja na tą chwilę wyłączam swoją kamerkę i mikrofon, żeby tutaj nie przeszkadzać i życzę powodzenia podczas dzisiejszego webinaru.
Dziękuję. Już Błażej zdążył mnie przedstawić z imienia i nazwiska. Ja zajmuję się w firmie Stovaris, poprzednio Alstor SDS, systemami pamięci masowej i systemami także hiperkonwergentnymi, stąd też dzisiejsza moja obecność i organizacja webinaru z firmą StarWind. Webinar będzie prowadzony w języku angielskim, ale dzięki temu usłyszymy bezpośrednio informacje od eksperta firmy StarWind, który od wielu lat zajmuje się rozwiązaniami firmy StarWind. Natomiast po zakończeniu jego wystąpienia ja z powrotem przejmę mikrofon i podsumowanie, no to cóż, może króciutkie, ale opowiem Państwu o kilku ciekawych aspektach dotyczących licencjonowania i sprzedaży i sztandarowego produktu StarWind vSAN. Także zachęcam do wytrwania do końca. I mam nadzieję, że będzie Państwu dzisiejszy webinar się podobał i poznacie Państwo kilka ciekawych rzeczy. Dowiecie się, że vSAN to nie tylko VMware, vSphere, a StarWind. Zresztą historycznie rzecz biorąc taka była kolejność. Więc już nie przedłużając specjalnie, oddaję głos naszemu ekspertowi, przedstawicielowi firmy StarWind, Andrzejowi Tuzowowi. I Andrzej, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Jerzy. Thank you, everyone. Today we're going to have hopefully a quite interesting presentation. I really wanted to cover the history of the company, the product philosophy, because I think that is actually quite underrepresented amongst a lot of vendors, where it is also important to understand not only what products a company offers, but why the company has developed these products and what is the future potentially for the corporate portfolio of a company. So let's talk a little bit about our core philosophy. It's building fundamental solutions for IT infrastructures. So this is an interesting thing. I also describe this as something very similar to the foundation of a building. Because whenever you walk past a building down the street, you just see a beautiful building and you think, wow, this is a great building. It looks great. A lot of people live there, a lot of offices in there. But you never really think about the foundation of the building because no one does that. Except the foundation is always there. It enables the building to be beautiful, to do whatever it does, to do its functions. Yet no one thinks about it. And I think this should be the approach for IT infrastructure as well. Because if it does its job, you shouldn't really think about it. It should just be there. All your applications, all your business critical processes are on top of those infrastructure solutions. But if it gets the job done, you don't think about it. And that's the concept that we actively adopt. We call it invisible infrastructure, where we aim to make sure that infrastructures deployed by StarWind are basically invisible to the customer. They don't have to think about them. And once a deployment is done, the next time they need to think about it is basically when they need to renew their support. That's the only time. So a very small intro about the company. StarWind has been on the market for 16 years. We have been one of the first players in the virtualization space. Currently over 10,500 deployments worldwide. So the technology is quite mature. We've seen, I wouldn't say all because that would be a bit loud, but we've seen most use cases and we've seen some very interesting deployments. So our engineering team is always happy to share its expertise and the vast experience of very different IT infrastructure deployments. And we were the first vendor, or among one of the first, to start doing software-defined storage back in 2005 and hyperconvergence back in 2008. So we've been doing hyperconvergence for over 10 years, 13 years now. And over this time, the technology has evolved quite significantly. The market has changed. And we have always been trying to stay on the cutting edge and bringing brand new technologies to our partners and customers. And we're going to discuss some of the new developments that we have made over the past several years today. So let's start with a very high-level intro of what is hyperconverged infrastructure. I'm sure that most people on this webinar know this quite well, but I think it's important to look at it in perspective to better understand why certain solutions have certain applications and to better understand different use cases of hyperconverged infrastructure. So overall, data centers have always had to adhere to several quite strict rules. You need to have 3 determined levels in a data center. You need to have your application layer, your networking layer, and your storage layer. Now, how those 3 levels are represented can be different, but they have to be present. And in a so-called classical approach, quite a few years ago, before 2005, data centers consisted of dedicated application servers connected into the backbone core switch, which would be connected to the storage arrays. So all the layers and components would be completely physical, and that would be the approach. Now, it did the job, it was great, but at the same time, it was extremely complex. It usually required 3 dedicated teams to support, where you had to have application teams, or for specific applications in particular. You had to have your networking team configuring all the networking equipment, and you had your storage team working just with the underlying storage array. That was completely possible and doable for enterprise, but it created a lot of complexity when it came to small and medium enterprise, also called small and medium business, and made it quite hard for them to maintain an efficient IT infrastructure that would fulfill their requirements. That's why back in 2005, a new technology started to get widespread adoption called virtualization, which allowed you to consolidate multiple applications on the same physical server while technically keeping them segregated. That was great, obviously, with 2 key players on the market, Hyper-V and VMware. They allowed you to really dramatically reduce the footprint of your IT infrastructure, allowing you to have basically 2, for example, application servers, virtualization servers, running your SQL databases, running ERPs, running your file servers, running your authorization and authentication systems. It was a lot better. It made it a lot smoother. But then the next step was taken in 2008, where hyperconverged became a thing. So with hyperconverged, what happened was you could really virtualize all of the components of the data center. You could have your virtualized applications with the hypervisor, you could have your virtualized networking, and you could have your virtualized storage. And that created a new possibility where you could literally have all the components of your data center residing in the same physical box. Now, while doing wonders to the hardware footprint, allowing you to dramatically reduce the size of the data center, it created a new problem where when all of your data, when all of your business critical applications are residing on a single server, if that server goes down, well, you're in a bit of a problematic situation. And that's why several vendors decided to streamline and use all of those technologies to create hyperconvergence, where you consolidate all the parts of the data center on the same hardware. Then you have a single pane of glass management console, allowing you to conveniently manage your whole infrastructure from a single application. And they develop various replication technologies, meaning that if you lose certain components of a server or even whole servers within the system, you can still be up and running and your applications will still be working. And that's where StarWind started working back in 2008 with its StarWind Virtual LAN product, which enabled maximum uptime and maximum performance for customer infrastructures. So let's talk a little bit about those layers from a different perspective. And let's talk about a very commonly known abbreviation called VAR, also known as Value Added Reseller. Now, if we look at the market right now, every single distributor, every single reseller will call themselves Value Added Distributor or Value Added Reseller. I think we've gotten to a point where the whole concept is a bit devalued, where the true value that is supposed to be behind the value add is not there for a lot of partners. And let's look at why that is happening and how to be very different from the competition and how to truly bring a lot of value to your customers as a partner. So obviously the foundation of the whole infrastructure pie is the hardware. Even if it's in the cloud, there is still hardware. It's just located in someone else's data center. That is the key component. Nothing can go without hardware. And a lot of partners obviously ship their own hardware. And the reality is a lot of partners are just so-called box movers. All they do is ship hardware. And they think that, yeah, we're a value-added reseller providing hardware to our customers. Well, that is not the case, because the best test you can do to understand if you're really bringing value is obviously a lot of account managers at partners have fantastic relationships with their customers. They're on first name terms. They meet often, even outside business hours. It's just a good relationship. But then let's imagine that for whatever reason, the customer decides to change their IT manager. Just hire a brand new person who hasn't been with the company before. And then that new person comes in. They look at the suppliers who's supplying them with equipment and ask an obvious question. Well, guys, what are you doing for us? And the answer would be, well, we're shipping hardware for you. They're like, okay, perfect. So I have a partner I've been working with for the past 10 years. They're a different partner than you. Is there anything specific about the hardware that that partner cannot do? Is there anything that they cannot ship out of what you provide us with? And when you start thinking about it, the answer is no. Because ultimately, all you're giving them is they're giving you an SKU for the hardware, and you're getting the hardware. That's it. So there's no real extra value. Now, the next part of the puzzle is the hyperconverged stack. Is that extra layer on top, which starts really enabling the infrastructure. But also, it doesn't really provide anything unique because it's another SKU just from a different vendor. So this is even not a. So people will call hardware plus a hyperconverged stack a solution, which is not truly a solution. That's the biggest problem with the market right now, that people do not truly understand the concept of solution. Shipping products is not shipping a solution. It's not the same thing. A product is just something specific that you ship for the customer. A solution is something a lot more complex, which not only fulfills their specific requirements for something specific, but it comes from a place where they will share a business problem with you, having nothing to do with IT. And you can use your expertise and knowledge to find a solution for that problem without them having to invest time and resource into researching, into understanding what they need. You know what they need. And that is the expertise that you bring. Which leads me to application expertise. Now, when we start talking about application, that changes the game up a little bit, because understanding how applications work with underlying hardware and the software ecosystem, and knowing how to properly spec a system to use a specific applications and to get the most of it. Now here we're starting to see some added value, because as we know, there are industry-specific resellers, for example, that know some very unique applications. For example, a good example would be companies doing geological research. Those applications are quite unique. They have quite unique requirements, and understanding how to spec a system to get the most out of those applications is important for those customers. Or video surveillance is a very big thing right now, and having a partner or vendor that really understands video surveillance systems and can ensure that the business problem that you have that requires surveillance as its solution can be resolved without you having to understand the different encodings, the different options of utilizing different resolutions, different frame rates, motion activated, non-motion activated, thermal cameras. It's just a very vast field where having that expertise sets you quite far apart from the competition. And finally, the pinnacle of this pyramid of infrastructure layers is services. And this is where the gap between different partners is the largest. This is what can really set you apart from other partners. Being able to provide a system on a so-called plug-and-play basis where the customer says, so ideal scenario where you're truly a value-added reseller is a customer comes to you and says, okay, so we are planning to launch new warehouses. We are looking to have the ability to control our stock, to update the supply in real time on our website, for example, being able to notify customers when things are in stock and out of stock, being to control shipments, being able to control logistics, etc. We don't know how to do that. You say, okay, we're going to bring you a solution. So you start working with ERP system vendors, you bring that ERP system to an underlying resilient high-performance platform, and basically you ship them a box which does exactly what they need it to do. That is the ideal scenario. That is an example of value brought compared to just shipping them boxes. And this is where StarWind comes into play. We have been a channel-only company for the past 5 years, and we have made some unique architectural and business decisions which enable us to have, I would not probably even hesitate to say, one of the best engineering teams in the industry. And we are ready to share that expertise with our partners. The fact that we do not do direct sales to customers means that all our branding, all our imaging, everything that's concerning StarWind and how it looks to customers is done through partners. And that is why we work very closely with our partners. We trust them very much, and we provide a lot of resources for them to ensure that they can really set themselves apart from the competition. Because ultimately for us, we are looking at our partners as people that deliver our solutions to the market. And the best way we can compete with our competition in the market, which is quite fierce, obviously, is ensuring that we have the most knowledgeable partners and we provide them with absolutely everything they need. And this is our core philosophy in terms of our channel strategy. We want you to focus on what you do really, really well. It's building those long-lasting, amazing relationships with the customers. And then we're basically your support squad, which brings you all the required marketing materials, all the required commercials. We will size and build solutions, which I'm going to talk about in more detail during the presentation, specifically for you and specifically for individual customers. And we're trying to really create this place where value-added reseller makes you a really big value-added reseller. So let's talk a little bit about the industry where we're target, the small and medium business, also known as small and medium enterprise, and the pain points we're seeing. Now, obviously, in each individual market, the pain points will be slightly different. StarWind works with pretty much all the markets out there. We're a worldwide company, and we're seeing different challenges across different territories. Some territories have unique challenges. Some territories have a slight delay on when certain challenges arrive to them. But over time, we've seen that there's 3 main problems that all businesses face, small and medium business in particular, and let's look at them. So the first and obvious one is complexity and challenges. Now, while a large enterprise company can typically have a very big support squad, a very big IT team doing different functions, in SME, you're usually going to see a team of 1 to 4 people that have to do everything. They have to fix printers, they have to refill printers, they have to fix laptops, they have to sort problems along the lines of, oh, something happened with my USB thumbstick. They have to research potential new infrastructure solutions, research applications, configure everything, support everything. It's a nightmare job. These people typically have a very hard time leaving for vacation because there's no one left to support the system if they're gone. And it's truly a very big challenge for them to deploy a new solution, which also leads to an interesting psychological problem because the market and the technologies constantly evolve very actively. And this means that they're stuck in a situation where they need to bring their IT infrastructure into the future, but at the same time, by bringing in a solution which they're not familiar with, they're compromising their expertise, because if something goes wrong and their boss asks, well, what happened? They can't properly provide a report on what happened because they are not familiar with this new technology, which means that for small and medium enterprise, it's very important that the solution is easy for them to deploy, where most of the work is being done by the partner, and most importantly, that it has rock solid support. And the solution is not only going to work, but if or when something happens, there is a team of professionals that's going to come to their rescue, provide a detailed report identifying what happened, why it happened, and providing a solution in a timely fashion. That is really important for them. Now, the second pain point would be the value for money. Now, that is important not only to small and medium enterprise, it's important for every business. But just for small and medium enterprise, it's a little bit more of a priority. Because while an enterprise will always focus on, okay, we're ready to spend as much as needed to find a solution which solves the problem. While for SMB, it's usually going to be, we have this amount of money. What can we do with this amount of money? And this leads to a very sad fact that a lot of the time, small and medium enterprise has to compromise. They don't get the complete solution to their problem. They get the best solution they could afford for the money, which puts StarWind in a very unique space because we are a very unique vendor in that we uphold the approach of providing enterprise-grade functionality at SMB level price ranges. And this means that they can actually get a solution which resolves all of their requirements, all of their problems, while still remaining in their budget. And this provides a very competitive advantage to you when you look at the competition, because obviously lots of players out there, we have a vSAN, for example, that has been mentioned, which is a great product. It is very robust in terms of functionality, but to access that robust functionality, you have to go for the higher level licenses, which can really be pretty much very tough to afford for small and medium enterprise. And then the final pain point is application uptime. This is an interesting one. Not all companies realize this, but any downtime has an incurred cost for a company. Now, that cost can be vastly different. I've personally worked with telecom companies that have several $1 million losses for 5 minutes of uptime, for example. So if their infrastructure goes down for 5 minutes, they're losing millions of dollars per minute. We've also worked with customers that basically the only thing they have running on their servers are just a very small SQL database and a Exchange server. For example, let's use the example of car service companies. Yes, downtime is a problem for them, but for example, even if they have like half an hour of downtime, that is not a major issue. They won't lose a lot of money. But it's really important to understand how downtime impacts their infrastructure. And when you're building out infrastructure solution, you need to take that into account. I need to have a complete strategy utilizing the so-called 3-to-1 approach with 3 copies of the data being kept on 2 different types of media, with 1 copy being kept outside. And for example, an interesting situation that happens often, I see when you're providing a quote to a customer for a solution, sometimes they will say, this is expensive. And that's something we will hear very often. But the question is, the word expensive out of context actually doesn't have any meaning, because expensive is relative. For example, when someone asks you, is a car expensive? And for example, the car is, let's say, a Mercedes S-Class, which costs around €50,000. Yes, for some people it would be expensive, but in comparison to a Lamborghini, that's not expensive. But when you compare a Lamborghini to a Bugatti Chiron, that is not expensive. So it's really important for CFOs of customers to understand that the real analysis you should be doing is how much money you are going to save from purchasing a solution. For example, I've had an interesting case with a customer where they were looking for a solution to ensure that they avoid any downtime, because they tended to have around half an hour of downtime every year on average. And we provided a solution which they said was expensive, quote unquote. So my question was, okay, so have you tried analyzing how much money you lose for those 30 minutes of downtime? And the customer was actually an e-shop. And they started looking at the numbers, and it turned out that they were losing around €100,000 for the 30 minutes of downtime because customers couldn't place orders on their website. And the solution was at €50,000 for a complete solution. So I said, if you get the solution, you're going to get twice the money you spend back within the first year. Do you still think it's expensive? And when looked at from that perspective, it becomes a no-brainer, because StarWind's functionality, uptime, and the level of services which we provide are completely unmatched across the industry at the same price points. So, with so much intro, let's look at the StarWind products and what they offer. So currently, StarWind ecosystem focuses on 3 key products, with obviously a lot of others being available as well. The flagship of our portfolio is StarWind Hyperconverged Appliance. It's the complete turnkey solution which comes as a couture, solution built for every specific customer. We analyze all of their requirements. We build a bespoke system for each customer, and that is the go-to solution that a lot of customers go with. Then there is the Virtual SAM product, the initial core engine behind all of the StarWind products. Probably the best iSCSI target in the industry, one of the best overall SDS stacks in the world. We have proven it actively by being the current hyperconverged system performance record holders. We achieved 25 million IOPS on a hyperconverged system, completely smashing Microsoft's previous record of, I believe, 12 million. So we more than doubled the previous record. And if you had to look at differentiation between these 2 products, from my experience, it would be that the hyperconverged appliance is the go-to solution when the customer is looking for a complete hardware refresh, while the vSAN solution is the ability to breathe in new life into their existing hardware. And also, if you have a well-established relationship of providing the customer with hardware, you can just build your own solutions by utilizing your own hardware and just adding the virtual SAN on top. So there are different options. And then this concludes with the last in the trio of products, StarWind VTL, which is the smart cloud destaging product, which allows you to create automatically destaged backup and DR storage. And this can allow you to have flexible disaster recovery policies where, for example, you can have multiple tiers. You can have your on-site backup. You can offload the data automatically after a certain period to a hot tier of cloud storage. And then you can offload it to archival, be that on-premise object storage, be that a cold object storage in the cloud, or be that just overall something like Amazon Glacier, which is just very cheap archival storage. And this can actually allow you to fulfill very difficult to complete regulatory requirements. As an example, I've worked with a company that does nuclear waste utilization, and the government requires that they have 50 years of recordings of the process stored somewhere, which, as you can imagine, 50 years of recordings can be quite expensive to store. And they have a smart destaging system utilizing StarWind of offloading the data to Amazon Glacier as the last destination, where the data is obviously very slow to access, but let's be real. 50 years of recordings is more of a regulatory requirement than actual need to bring the data back. So that really allows you to fulfill the requirements without breaking the bank. And obviously the 2 key hypervisors we support are Microsoft Hyper-V and VMware vSphere. KVM, XAN are possible, but those hypervisors have their own gimmicks. In case of XAN, they have certain issues with multipathing, which makes hyperconverged solutions them quite unique challenges, but we have done those deployments, so if needed, we can easily repeat that. And for KVM, there are very different modifications of KVM, and each of those need to be treated individually, so that's something that we can discuss. Let's talk about hyperconverged appliance and how we've changed it in recent years. So about 4 years ago, we started doing our hyperconverged appliances because we realized that a lot of our customers, they bought the vSAN solution and then had to do brand new deployments, which create complexity because and also implied complexity, where comparing with some other vendors, they were thinking it's a lot harder than it is. Because if you look at something like VMware, there is a very strict hardware compatibility list. And if you step your toe outside the line, if you get any hardware out of the HCL, you're going to have a very fun time getting support from VMware. So with StarWind, it was a lot more simple, but we decided to streamline even further and enable partners and customers to really get completely plug-and-play solutions that are just, they come to your location, you plug them in, and they work. That's all. But with that core idea in mind, we wanted to develop the technology further and enable people to do more with less. And that's why we've been working very closely with Intel for the past 2 years on utilizing the absolutely best of breed SSDs that they have, the Optane model line, to enable a very unique solution. So about 2 years ago, we were actively monitoring the prices of SSDs on the market, and we came to a point where we realized that read-intensive SSDs have gotten to a place where their dollar per gigabyte is quite close to traditional HDDs. And then we thought, well, if people are so used to building hybrid infrastructures out of spindles and mixed-use SSDs, why not utilize the fact that for spindle drives you would usually have to use RAID 10, while for SSDs you would typically go for RAID 5 because they don't have the write penalty and they don't have the serious issues with rebuild times like HDDs do. We decided to start building systems utilizing only flash, where the entry-level models would utilize read-intensive SSDs, the middle line would utilize a mix of read-intensive SSDs and mixed-use SSDs, creating tiering, and then the no compromises ultimate performance model line would have only mixed-use SSDs. And that solution was an experiment because no one decided to do all flash appliances for SMB before. And we were really lucky because our customers really saw the value in that, and we did a lot of evangelization. I personally talked to a lot of partners and vendors out there explaining the values in bringing all flash to SMB, and it became really, really popular. So we decided to take the next step, and we worked closely with Intel on utilizing Intel Optane as a caching tier, using all of the amazing benefits of Optane while smoothing out the cost of Optane SSDs for customers. So the value spec, same as before, it utilizes pure read-intensive SSDs. This is the perfect choice for small businesses and allows you to just have a system which already has really good performance because it's still SSD, but at the same time it comes at a price point which is affordable for most small and medium enterprises. And you have the capacity spec, which utilizes a combination of read-intensive SSDs to provide your underlying storage foundation, and then Intel Optane acting as the caching layer, ensuring that basically for most of your workloads, because as we know, caching works in a way where over 90% of the data that you utilize on a day-to-day basis is basically the same data. So having that data stored, actually, I made a mistake there because I meant to say 10% of the data, the overall data set, is being utilized for 90% of the time, meaning that utilizing those Optane SSDs for caching allows you to basically have Optane levels of performance for most of the time, while still having the price point of read-intensive SSDs, which is quite unique. And then if you look at the performance spec, this is no compromises, mixed-use SSDs, and Optane is caching. Those systems can pump over 250,000 apps, more if required by customers. And really, if a customer says, okay, I have a performance-hungry application, you can just literally wave it away because our engineers will build a solution which can match pretty much any performance level if needed. And this is unique as well because for SMB previously they had to compromise on performance, while with StarWind's new generation, we are really bringing that cutting-edge technology to every company, unlike just a select few in the enterprise. The architecture is obviously quite straightforward. We are a vendor that starts with a very minimalistic hardware footprint. We have all the features enabled starting from just 2 nodes, enabling so-called edge scenarios. Because as we're seeing the development of Internet of Things, video surveillance, green power, it's becoming very important to decentralize the infrastructure. Because if you look previously, everyone tried to bring everything into the same data center, while now companies are trying to process data a lot closer to the source, which means that it's important to have resilient, rugged, and very small footprint systems closer to the source of the data, which means that StarWind can start with just 2 nodes. It will utilize a combination of mixed-use or read-intensive SSDs and an Optane caching layer. You have your hypervisor on top, Microsoft Hyper-V or VMware. Then you have StarWind providing the management and the fault tolerance. Then you have your highly available cluster in cases of Hyper-V. And then you have your VMs and applications running on that foundation. And obviously, StarWind's active-active synchronization enables that you can lose up to a whole server in a 2-node scenario, or up to a whole server and some components in the second server, and you're still going to be up and running. There are also options to have 3-factor applications. There are options to build large grid clusters, providing the possibility to lose up to 50% of the cluster without ever going down or having any application downtime. So StarWind systems, based on the architecture, are extremely flexible, and you can build them in a way which really fulfills any requirements. So I guess let's talk about the most interesting part, about how and where you can sell StarWind, how to understand which use cases are good to provide StarWind to customers, and just get a high-level understanding of what specific things would trigger you to think, okay, maybe this is a use case for StarWind. Obviously, for more specific use cases, you can talk with colleagues that have already done it. You can talk with our wonderful hosts today, and they can provide you with some experience of the StarWind deployments they have done. But let's jump to the detail. So one example I'm seeing very often is decentralized infrastructures. And this is an interesting one because if you look at the StarWind partner portfolio, you're going to notice that some partners make their annual StarWind revenue by selling a lot of smaller licenses. And then there are some partners that do 1 or 2 deals a year. But at the same time, those 1 or 2 deals bring in several million euro for them, for example. And this is one of those use cases. So let's say a company has their headquarters with centralized backup and DR and the primary infrastructure where it's being replicated to. Then they have individual locations. Now, that can be shops, that can be remote offices, that can be warehouses. It could be any type of locations that are in a large enterprise which is geographically spread. You have those locations spread across the country or continent, for that matter. And then you have a small StarWind HCA on each of those locations, ensuring that they have the best performance and resiliency in that specific location. Then you have replication to the primary data center with backup or disaster recovery, which means that you already have very high resiliency on the individual location. Then, if that fails, you can restore from the data center. If that fails, you can, if there's like a complete failure of the primary location, and they have, for example, laptops battery powered, and they have 4G or upcoming 5G internet, they can restore in the data center, connect to that remote instance, and just keep working with nothing running from the infrastructure on the initial location. Then, if that fails, they can restore from a cloud instance. And then if that fails, they can restore in the cloud and connect to that. So this creates and allows you to create such an insane level of resiliency for your business, such an insane level of business continuity, that we often joke that at this point, customers may want to invest into heavy assault weaponry and just being able to protect themselves from aliens, because the chances of aliens stealing their data is much higher than they're going to have downtime with that type of scenario. And also it enables the most important thing for remote office, branch office scenarios and decentralized infrastructure, scalability, where whenever you have a new location and you work closely with a StarWind partner, we understand the different locations that they have. We understand their requirements. We will usually have specific bill of materials and specific models set aside for these customers. Whenever they have a new location, they just say, okay, we have a medium location of ours coming up, and the partner can just go like, yeah, okay, medium location means you're going to need this specification. We're ready to ship this to you. We're going to ship this to a new location. You can flush a template of your infrastructure from the primary data center or from the cloud, and you're going to be good to go. So deploying the IT infrastructure of a new location from a problem becomes completely invisible, which rings a few bells from the beginning of my presentation about invisible infrastructure, where it's not even something they have to actively keep in mind. Whenever they're opening a new location, there's so many worries. There's the marketing, the opening of a new location, for example, for a retail chain. There is the supply problems. There is the logistics problems. There is the hiring problems. There is just so many different issues where they don't want to be focused. They don't want to be thinking about data infrastructure. They want that problem to go away And that's exactly what StarWind partners do. And this example is actually something that was done by a pretty large retail chain called Auchan in several countries. And they're extremely happy with that solution, where it really resolved most of their business problems. So let's talk about use cases like very specifically. I'm not a marketing person. That may be a good thing or a bad thing, but that means that I will not tell you things that are not there. One of the foundations of the way we do business is StarWind wants to really ensure that we are the best solution for the specific customer before we go into this, because our reputation is very important for us. And we are always claiming that we have the best support, and this has been proven multiple times. And we really know what we're selling, because I'm sure everyone has seen use cases where a vendor will go into a tender, for example, and say, yeah, we can do everything that you're asking. And then when they're winning the tender, it turns out that other things they can do, other things they won't be able to do. And it's just a very unpleasant experience for everyone involved, the vendor, the partners, the customer. And this is why it's important for us to work with partners to understand the use cases where we're the strongest and play in accounts where we can really bring value, and we can not try to invent how we're better than competitors, but just come in and say, we're strictly better than competitors specifically for you. So one of the major things, obviously, is new deployments ranging from several gigabytes to several hundred terabytes. This comes from hyperconverged and StarWind in particular architectural limitations, where traditional SAN vendors will tell you that hyperconverged doesn't have a use case. SANs are the best. While hyperconverged vendors will tell you that, oh no, hyperconverged is the best. Deploy hyperconverged in every infrastructure. Don't deploy SANs. Obviously, truth is in the middle. It's a balance where for large deployments, multi-petabyte deployments, traditional SANs are still the best because single namespace creates a lot of simplicity. It's very easy to manage. It offers great performance. While for smaller infrastructures, the single pane of glass management console, the way they provide storage and the resiliency makes hyperconverged systems far superior. So for example, large primary data centers, traditional storage I still think is the way to go, while for remote locations or smaller businesses, hyperconverged is the correct solution. And as mentioned, remote office, branch office scenarios, these are enabled by the minimalistic footprint of StarWind. These are enabled by the way that we treat each individual customer as a dedicated project, allowing us to really take a look at their requirements, not offer something that is approximately what you need, but rather have a solution which specifically meets their needs and sets us apart from the competition, which usually just have several models and they're like, well, take your pick from this, this, or this. We build a solution for every individual customer. And that's like a custom-made jacket, because, for example, customers are used to go to the shop and buying a jacket from the shop, which works, it's nice. It doesn't suit you perfectly, but it's good enough. And that's the problem. People are so used to going for good enough that they don't realize that you don't have to go for good enough. In case of StarWind, we will have something which is done perfectly for you, like a custom tailored suit. It's going to suit you perfectly. It's going to factor in your growth for the period that you plan to use it for, and you're never going to have to worry about, again, making it truly invisible. Replacing existing small SAN deployments, as I mentioned, SAN is not the best solution for smaller deployments. And obviously, historically, SAN has been a very high margin product for the vendors. And that's why the sales representatives of vendors will actively force SAN into every deployment out there. I have a strong suspicion that if their grandmother calls them and says, hey, grandson, I need somewhere to store my potatoes and I don't have anywhere, they're saying, I'm going to sell you a SAN, because they're just so used to doing that. But realistically, replacing a SAN with a hyperconverged system just removes a lot of complexity for customers. Legacy physical server environments, they're still there. That's still a technology that's actively used for obvious reasons. Some applications just don't support virtualization. Some companies are just hesitant of migrating their data from physical servers. But the simplicity of deploying StarWind, working with our partners, and the fact that StarWind offers migration assistance to our partners makes it just so much easier and puts away a lot of worries that typically have people avoiding moving away from legacy physical server environments. Legacy backup environments. Now, the reason I call these backup environments legacy is because my marketing team informed me that I'm not allowed to use bad words in my presentations. But I can tell you from our experience, we've seen backup infrastructures which are, they just make you cry. I've seen a company that stored their critical database, which is basically their whole business, on a spindle drive in an old laptop. My question, guys, what happens if that laptop fails during a restore? They were like, what happens? We don't know. I'm like, well, you're going to lose your whole business. And yeah, those type of customers, I'm sure we all have them, and just evangelizing them to transition to something more reasonable, to a true 3-2-1 approach is the way to go. And StarWind's combination of being flexible in terms of the backup vendor we use and our great relationship with Veeam as an example, and VTL allows you to offer them a complete solution, enabling them to have a proper backup and DR strategy. And then if we look at the industries where StarWind really fits in, those are retail, healthcare, education, government, public sector, and just SMB and robo in general. All of those have the same requirements. They want to have the newest and best technology while having it reasonably priced and while not having to invest a lot of time, money, and expertise into it. And that's why they're looking to partners as the experts that are going to help them deploy those solutions. And that's where StarWind comes into play with our just overall ecosystem of allowing partners to be that expert for their customers. So one of the key things, StarWind brings in free installation and migration services to partners, allowing you to make the choice. You can either resell it as additional services, or you can factor it in as extra value for the customer. Now let's talk about one of the unique differentiators of StarWind. Let's talk about proactive support and how it enables our partners. So if we look at a traditional support system, which people are very well familiar with, we encounter it not only in our IT lives, but we also encounter it in everyday things when we send our mobile phones to services, when we send our car to car services. We see a very similar experience where whenever you have a problem, you need to find out about it, which can take a vastly different amount of time depending on how severe the problem is, because some less noticeable problems can be taking several weeks to notice, while your system is already having pretty severe problems, which you're just not seeing. Or, obviously, if everything goes black, yeah, okay, something happened. You figured out quite well, quite fast. But the duration of that process is not determined. Now, after that, you need to find the root cause of what happened. Then you need to narrow it down to something specific. Actually, which vendor is at fault, for example. Then you need to submit a ticket. Then you need to wait for support. And waiting for support is not just getting the answer, okay, we received your ticket, we're on it, which happens within the SLA. Is when you get the actual support, which can take very different amounts of times depending on the vendor. Then they will start the fixing process finally at step 6. And then they will involve third-party vendors, because a complete solution has different vendors involved. And they will love to shift the blame between each other and just have overall point fingers, not want to solve it, while the customer is very unhappy, the partner is unhappy, everyone's unhappy. And then finally you have a solution. It's just a very frustrating process. From my experience, I've noticed that I would say around 50% of customers that don't work with a partner or vendor anymore, it happens because of a bad support experience. If you want to retain customers, you have a unique support experience, and that's exactly what StarWind decided to do. Decided to completely reformat the support experience for customers. So whenever there's an issue with a customer's infrastructure, we instantly find out about it, or we even predict it with our analytical system using StarWind Health Monitoring Service. In real time, knowing what happened, we start looking for a solution. We already involve any third-party vendors if needed. We reach out for remote access. We resolve the issue, and we report back. That's it. So if you can see, from the left you have what the customer sees, from the right what StarWind sees. So the customer had a problem, and he didn't have a problem. That's it. Compare this to the fact that something happened with your car. Your dealership just comes in, takes the car, leaves a replacement car, then calls you back and says, okay, you had a problem with your car, we fixed it, here's your car back. Honestly, if that happened, I'll be a very happy person. But unfortunately, not all companies have formed support policies as amazing as StarWind is. I typically can make an interesting challenge where before we were restricted in terms of traveling when we attended community events, I said that we have the best support in the industry and offered any other vendor to challenge that. And that is based on the fact that proactive support comes included with every single StarWind HCA. So that's comparable to something that Nimble, for example, does with InfoSight, but that's in a high-level enterprise product, where this comes, it's a product which is available for pretty much any business out there. And the response time is under 15 minutes on average from the issue happening. So that's a 24/7, 365 support contract, where after something is being detected, an engineer will reach out to you within maximum an hour, but realistically it's around 15 to 20 minutes. And that can be a weekend, a holiday, it doesn't matter. So no one offers that on default. We're the only vendor out there that does that, and that's another value we bring to our partners. We have also recently launched StarWind Command Center, which is a convenient single pane of glass management tool for Hyper-V. As we know, Hyper-V management can be quite complex, so we decided to deliver a solution which resolves those problems. And obviously for VMware, we still adhere to the fact that everyone is used to using vCenter. So instead of trying to bring all the vCenter functionality into StarWind, we actually decided to bring StarWind into vCenter functionality with our own vCenter plugin. These are some of the customers that we typically work with. Some of our technology partners, some, for example, like Bosch, work closely with StarWind on video surveillance systems, one of our key areas of expertise and one of the largest things that we do worldwide. And with that, I would like to thank you for your time. I hope the presentation told you something interesting, something new, maybe some of the statistics, maybe some of the information. And I hand it back to Jerzy. Thank you so much.
Witam Państwa jeszcze raz bardzo serdecznie. Wytrzymajcie Państwo jeszcze kilka minutek do końca naszego seminarium. W ramach podsumowania chciałbym tylko zwrócić uwagę na to, o czym mówił kolega Andrzej ostatnio, to znaczy o ich wsparciu technicznym dostarczanym wraz z ich rozwiązaniami. Chcę wspomnieć, podkreślić to, co było tutaj przez chwilkę powiedziane, że nie jest, że support ten dotyczy także w przypadku sprzedaży appliance'ów przez StarWinda, dotyczy także aplikacji, których Państwo używacie, czyli nie będziecie Państwo skazani na kontaktowanie się z supportem producenta aplikacji, który może zwalić winę na producenta sprzętu, na producenta systemu operacyjnego i tak dalej. Tutaj wszystko będzie supportowane, wspierane, problemy rozwiązywane przez inżynierów StarWinda. Jest to bardzo, bardzo rzeczywiście pożyteczna funkcjonalność i z tego StarWind słynie. Poza tym, jeśli nawet Państwo będziecie kupowali najprostsze rozwiązanie, najprostsze w stosunku do tego, co StarWind jest w stanie zaoferować, czyli vSANa od StarWinda, czyli tylko licencję oprogramowania, to też w tym wypadku macie Państwo support ze strony firmy StarWind, przez pierwszy rok nawet w większym zakresie niż w następnych latach. I w tym wypadku nawet przy instalacji StarWind oferuje darmową pomoc przy tej instalacji. Czasami nawet ta pomoc jest bardzo, bardzo dość dużym zakresie, także tutaj nie musicie się Państwo obawiać, że cokolwiek się stanie, to StarWind będzie szukał, prawda, jakiejś tam wymówki. Nie, tutaj będzie dokładnie odwrotnie. StarWind zrobi naprawdę wszystko, żeby Państwu pomóc. Także to jest rzeczywiście bardzo istotna rzecz w przypadku korzystania z rozwiązań firmy StarWind i w porównaniu z konkurencją. Jeśli byście chcieli a propos konkurencji Państwo porównać, czym nasze rozwiązanie się różni od tych sztandarowych rozwiązań, powiedzmy VMware'a, vSANa czy Storage Spaces Direct, Hyper-V, to zapraszam na naszą stronę, gdzie mamy taki króciutki wpis, artykuł dotyczący właśnie takiego krótkiego porównania z konkurencją. Z tego porównania oczywiście niezbicie wynika, że nasze rozwiązanie jest najlepsze z wielu różnych względów, no chociażby chociażby z tego chyba najważniejszego, czyli z punktu widzenia ceny rozwiązania. Chcę teraz tylko na zakończenie jeszcze tylko powiedzieć kilka słów na temat samego tego właśnie najprostszego, a w sumie najbardziej popularnego rozwiązania, czyli StarWind vSANa. Tutaj mamy dwie wersje tego rozwiązania. Jest StarWind vSAN dla Hyper-V i StarWind vSAN dla VMware'a. To nie znaczy, że to są dwa różne rozwiązania. Rozwiązania są w zasadzie takie same, te same, natomiast jeśli chodzi o licencjonowanie, troszeczkę to się różni. W przypadku Hyper-V licencjonujemy to per węzeł i pojemność w trybie wysokiej dostępności, czyli mamy taką najprostszą wersję 4-terabajtową, tak zwaną standard, wersję vSANa Advanced, vSANa Professional, gdzie mamy 8 terabajtów i vSANa Enterprise, gdzie nie ma ograniczenia pojemności, ale nadal jest licencjonowanie na 2 węzły. Tutaj chcę wspomnieć, że StarWind tym między innymi różni się od konkurencji, że jesteśmy w stanie zbudować klaster już z 2 węzłów i to jest taka podstawowa wersja vSANa, która cieszy się największą popularnością. Jeśli chodzi o VMware'a, StarWind zdecydował się na zrobienie takiego bundla i mamy StarWind dla wersji Remote Office, Branch Office, ale to jest ta wersja tylko tak nazwana przez StarWinda, to nie ma nic wspólnego z licencjonowaniem VMware'a i ta wersja jest od razu dla 2 węzłów bez limitu pojemności i jest wersja tak zwana Essential, też nie ma to nic wspólnego z VMware Essential, tylko tak ją StarWind nazwał i ta wersja jest dla 3 węzłów też w ustalonej cenie. Jakie to są poziomy cenowe, jakie tam są upusty, jaki jest powiedzmy support możliwy do kupienia, to zapraszam do kontaktu albo z naszymi partnerami, albo bezpośrednio z nami. Tak jak to kolega z firmy StarWind powiedział, firma StarWind jest w 100% firmą, która sprzedaje poprzez kanał sprzedaży, czyli dystrybutorów i partnerów. My także preferujemy i w zasadzie w 100% korzystamy z tego modelu, czyli sprzedajemy przez naszych partnerów, ale oczywiście możemy pomagać naszym partnerom w kontaktach z klientami końcowymi i powiedzmy zachęcać ich do rozwiązania. Takie prezentacje, jakie Państwo przed chwilą widzieliście, mogą być ewentualnie przy konkretnych projektach przeprowadzone dla konkretnego klienta, także tutaj zapraszam do kontaktu z naszą firmą. Ja myślę, że na dzisiaj to chyba już byłoby koniec, bo akurat już mniej więcej minęła godzina, tak naprawdę to nawet kilka minutek, no ale równo godzinę od rozpoczęcia. Tutaj kolega Błażej wysłał Państwu na czacie no właśnie, tutaj koledzy się pytają, gdzie możemy to znaleźć, ten link, to chyba Błażej mnie słyszy, więc chyba Błażej, jakbyś był taki uprzejmy wpisać ten link tutaj w czacie, bo ja nie chcę, powiedzmy, będzie może szybciej. Z tego co ja pamiętam, nawet z naszej strony Stovaris.pl jest taki baner i na tym banerze któraś z pozycji banera prowadzi bezpośrednio właśnie do tego porównania, ale możemy tutaj, może kolega bezpośrednio ten link da z porównaniu właśnie z konkurencją. Czy są jeszcze jakieś pytania? O, właśnie, kolega Błażej widzę już dał to porównanie, dał link do tego porównania, sprawdzimy, czy rzeczywiście, no na pewno, ale tak, działa jak najbardziej, bo w tej chwili sprawdziłem, prawda? Także serdecznie zapraszam. ze skalowalnością tego rozwiązania Visan. No więc tutaj skalowalność oczywiście może być więcej, czyli może być 2, 3 takie jakieś konkretne ze skalowania, znaczy możemy dawać więcej niż 2 węzły, 3 węzły, 4 węzły. No ja osobiście nie spotkałem się z więcej niż 3 węzłami, ale oczywiście jak najbardziej tak. Natomiast jeśli chodzi o pojemność, no to tak jak mówiłem, w przypadku Wisfera nie ma tego ograniczenia pojemności i możemy cały czas dokładać następną przestrzeń dyskową oraz możemy dokładać, znaczy to w sumie to jest istotne, prawda, tą przestrzeń dyskową, a jeśli chodzi o Hyper-V, to oczywiście jest możliwy upgrade z wersji tej z ograniczeniem do 4 na wersję 8 terabajtową i także na wersję bez ograniczeń. Jeśli chodzi o odpowiedź na to pytanie, tutaj kolega, jeden z Państwa zadał dotyczące jakie konkretne korzyści dla klienta ekonomiczne z zakresu bezpieczeństwa HCI w porównaniu z rozwiązaniem klasycznym. No tutaj kolega Andrzej z firmy StarWind mówił, że no oczywiście są w przypadku zastosowań dla mniejszych i średnich firm te korzyści są zdecydowanie widoczne, natomiast dla data center, prawda, dla wielkich centrów danych, no być może rzeczywiście rozwiązania klasyczne nadal są bardziej popularne, ale no cóż, no tutaj jeśli chodzi o odpowiedź na to, o porównania rozwiązań HCI a rozwiązań klasycznych, to ja bym może tutaj nie przedłużał, bo tutaj podejrzewam, że mogłaby być troszeczkę dłuższa dyskusja. Ja bym proponował kontakt bezpośredni z nami, a tak naprawdę my postaramy się z Panem skontaktować i porozmawiać na ten temat. Czekam, czy jeszcze są jakieś pytania. Na czacie widzę, rozwiązanie pod Hyper-V ograniczone, nie, no to wynikało bardziej powiem tak historycznie, ze sposobu licencjonowania, bo po prostu był taki okres czasu, że wydawało się, że rozwiązania Hyper-V i rozwiązania vSphere, no ich udział w rynku będzie podobny, ale okazało się, że jednak vSphere zachował większy udział, czy nawet troszeczkę zwiększył swój udział. W związku z tym koledzy z firmy StarWind stwierdzili, że dla vSphere'a zrobią prostsze licencjonowanie i bardziej atrakcyjne cenowo, żeby walczyć z firmą, czy konkurować z rozwiązaniem Visan firmy VMware. Natomiast w przypadku Hyper-V, no cóż, pozostał stary sposób licencjonowania, bo do jakieś powiedzmy 2-3 lata, chyba 2 lata temu nadal był dla VMware'a też był taki sam sposób licencjonowania per węzeł i pojemność. Dopiero, tak jak wspomniałem, jakieś około 2 lat temu to się zmieniło. Natomiast rozwiązanie pod Hyper-V, no akurat to jeszcze zbiegło się w tym okresie, że był taki okres czasu, że Storage Spaces Direct oferowane przez Microsoft było niedostępne i w tym momencie StarWind stwierdził, że nie widzi powodu, dla którego będzie zmieniał sposób licencjonowania dla Hyper-V. Ale tak naprawdę to jest tylko tak troszeczkę ta cena, powiedzmy dla VMware'a z tych względów, o których powiedziałem, jest bardziej atrakcyjna. Dla Hyper-V jest to troszeczkę wychodzi drożej, jeśli liczymy to per pojemność, natomiast nie jest to nic trudniejszego. Sposób postępowania fizycznego, powiedzmy, z dołączaniem tej nowej pojemności jest identyczny, natomiast jest tylko nadal kwestia, powiedzmy, ceny rozwiązania dla VMware'a i rozwiązania dla Hyper-V, ale mam nadzieję, że to wyjaśniłem, dlaczego tak to w tej chwili wygląda. Porównanie co tutaj kolega napisał, że co by było takiego ciekawego, jeśli chodzi o HCI, że szybki deployment. Tak, no to jest rzeczywiście rzecz istotna, natomiast no cóż, tutaj koledzy, jeśli chodzi o rozwiązania hiperkonwergentne, no cały czas podkreślają to, że jest to, powiedzmy, łatwiejsze także w późniejszym zarządzaniu, bo mamy jakby jeden interfejs, jeden sposób zarządzania wszystkimi zasobami sprzętowymi. Patrzę, czy jeszcze jakieś pytania się pojawiają. Tak, nie widzę, żeby ktoś pisał okej. Aczkolwiek, ale cóż, no ja myślę, że nie będziemy przedłużali. Zapraszam Państwa na nasze następne webinary. Oczywiście, jeśli chodzi o StarWinda, jak najbardziej zapraszam do kontaktu z nami i my oczywiście postaramy się odpowiedzieć na wszelkie pytania. Jeśli się to nie uda, to oczywiście będziemy się posiłkowali firmą StarWind, która na pewno odpowie na wszelkie Państwa pytania. Także z mojej strony ja dziękuję bardzo. Błażej, chcesz jeszcze jakieś coś?
Tak, na wszelki wypadek jeszcze zamieszczę jeszcze raz kontakt do Ciebie na czacie, żeby po prostu łatwo było, można sobie skopiować te dane i ewentualnie po już zakończeniu dzisiejszego wydarzenia śmiało można kontaktować się bezpośrednio z Jerzym, jak również z całym działem naszym handlowym. Z naszej strony to w zasadzie tyle, ponieważ nie ma więcej pytań. Zapraszamy jak najbardziej do śledzenia naszej strony internetowej, jeśli chodzi o konkretne dalsze wydarzenia, które będziemy organizować, jak również do kontaktu z nami. Bardzo Jerzy dziękuję za podsumowanie i informacje dotyczące licencjonowania. Andrew, one more time, thank you very much for your time and for your presentation. I hope that you will stay safe. It's time now to say goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for your time. Stay safe, and I hope today was enjoyable for you.
Goodbye. Thank you very much for the presentation. Także dziękujemy Państwu bardzo. Ja zapraszam do kontaktu, mail, telefon. Także dziękujemy bardzo na dzisiaj i zapraszamy na następne nasze spotkania. Dziękuję bardzo.
Do zobaczenia.